I straightened the last orchid in the centerpiece as the soft murmur of conversation drifted in from the living room. Perfect. Everything had to be perfect. The table's setting gleamed under the crystal chandelier, bone china, sterling silver, and crystal that caught the light just so. I smoothed my hands over the midnight blue dress I'd chosen for tonight's dinner, took a deep breath, and put on my smile. The one I'd perfected over 7 years of marriage to Alexander Reed. "Darling, are the Morgans here yet?" I called out, knowing full well they weren't. The dining room of our Upper East Side penthouse looked like something out of Architectural Digest. It should. I'd spent countless hours ensuring every detail projected exactly what Alexander wanted the world to see: success, taste, and a wife who knew her place. "Rebecca, for God's sake, you know they're always 15 minutes late." Alexander appeared in the doorway, scotch in hand, that irritated edge to his voice he never bothered to hide anymore. "Mother's asking about the wine selection." Of course she was. Judith Reed had never approved a single choice I'd made in the 7 years I'd been married to her precious son. "I've selected the Chateau Margaux for the main course," I replied, my voice honeyed and pleasant. "But I can change it if she prefers something else." Alexander waved his hand dismissively. "She'll make do. She always does." He turned to leave, then paused, looking at the flowers. "Orchids, bit showy, aren't they?" I maintained my smile. The florist assured me they're quite on trend for spring. He gave a half shrug that said more than words ever could and rejoined our guests. I counted to 10 before following him. The evening proceeded as these dinners always did. Alexander holding court at the head of the table, regaling our guests with the brilliance of his latest market play. The same market play I'd outlined for him 3 weeks ago while he half listened, scrolling through his phone. "The beauty of the Singapore acquisition," Alexander was saying as I refilled wine glasses, "was recognizing the pattern in their quarterly reports that everyone else missed." I'd been the one who spotted the pattern. 3 consecutive quarters of artificially deflated earnings to make the fourth quarter appear miraculous. Classic manipulation to attract buyers before a strategic sale. I'd explained it to Alexander over breakfast, sketched the timeline, even prepared the presentation he'd later claim as his own work. "Alexander has always had an eye for these things," Judith said, patting her son's hand. She turned to me with that smile that never reached her eyes. "Rebecca, dear, these orchids are an interesting choice. Aren't they a bit common for a dinner of this caliber?" Common. The woman who wore the same pearl necklace to every function for 20 years was calling my centerpiece common. "I find they add a touch of the exotic," I replied, my voice warm despite the ice forming in my chest. "But I'll certainly consider your preference for next time." Sophia, Alexander's sister, laughed that brittle laugh of hers. It must be so nice for Alexander to have a wife who's content to worry about flowers and dinner parties while he focuses on the important work. The important work. The work I'd been doing since I graduated summa cum laude from Wharton, before Alexander had swept me off my feet with promises of partnership, personal and professional. Before I discovered that what he really wanted was a trophy wife smart enough to help him behind the scenes, but not ambitious enough to claim credit. "Someone has to make sure the trains run on time," I said lightly, raising my glass in a mock toast. "To the men who make the money and the women who make everything else possible." They laughed, glasses clinking. They always laughed when I played into the role. It made them comfortable. Nobody noticed the edge in my smile. Nobody ever did. After dessert, I excused myself to check on coffee. The kitchen was empty. I dismissed the staff earlier, preferring to handle the final touches myself. Privacy was essential tonight. As I arranged the espresso cups on a silver tray, I heard Alexander's study door open down the hall. His voice carried, sharp with tension. "Not here, Megan. We'll discuss it tomorrow at the office." I froze, listening. Megan Chen, his executive assistant. The one he'd hired fresh out of business school, bypassing far more qualified candidates. "But the transfer needs to happen tonight," she insisted, her voice low but urgent. "The Cayman account is—" "I said not now," Alexander hissed. Rebecca has ears like a bat, and the last thing I need is her asking questions about offshore accounts. I set the tray down silently and pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering. This confirmed what I'd discovered 3 months ago. The discrepancies in the quarterly reports I'd been reviewing, the mysterious transfers, the shell companies I'd traced through public records and private databases. Alexander wasn't just taking credit for my work. He was using my financial strategies to build a fraudulent empire right under my nose. I slipped into the butler's pantry and removed a small USB drive hidden behind loose baseboard molding. On it was every piece of evidence I'd been methodically collecting since the day I'd discovered the truth. Every transaction, every email, every recording of conversations he thought no one would ever hear. I tucked the drive into my bra, arranged the coffee service, and returned to the dining room with the practiced smile that had become my armor. "Ah, here she is," Alexander said as I entered, raising his glass. "To my beautiful, supportive wife, the perfect hostess." Everyone raised their glasses. No one noticed that I didn't drink. In my head, I started the countdown. 14 days until the board meeting. 14 days until Alexander Reed discovered exactly who he had married. 3:17 a.m. The blue light of my laptop illuminated the home office I'd claimed as my own, the one room Alexander rarely entered because it lacked the mahogany and leather he deemed necessary for a proper workspace. My eyes burned from hours of scrutinizing financial statements, but I couldn't stop now, not when I was so close. On the screen, wire transfer records from a Cayman Islands account to a series of shell companies in Singapore, Panama, and Liechtenstein. Alexander's fingerprints were all over them, though he'd been careful, just not careful enough for someone who knew his patterns as intimately as I did. I clicked play on a recording. Alexander at last month's executive retreat, 3 drinks in and loose-lipped with his inner circle. "Rebecca's excellent at organizing things." His voice filled my headphones. "Great eye for detail. But the real financial strategy requires an instinct she'll never have. It's why I handle the big picture and let her feel important with the quarterly audits." The recording continued, Alexander and his cronies laughing, unaware that the smart watch I'd given him for our anniversary was picking up every word. A soft knock at the door made me jump. I quickly closed the laptop as the door cracked open. "Still at it?" Vanessa's voice was a welcome relief as my best friend from college and now director of risk assessment at First Metro Bank slipped into the room. "I brought more files." I exhaled, reopening the laptop. "You're an angel. Please tell me it's what we need." Vanessa placed a sealed envelope on my desk. "Complete records of offshore transfers for the past 18 months. And you were right. Alexander routed everything through James Thorne's accounts to create a buffer." James Thorne, Alexander's college roommate and supposed business rival. The competition Alexander loved to publicly disparage while privately collaborating with him to defraud investors. "This confirms the pattern," I said, scanning the documents. "Alexander uses my investment strategies, claims them as his own, then siphons profits through Thorne's network before they hit the books." Vanessa sank into the chair opposite me. "What I don't understand is why. Alexander's legitimate earnings are substantial. Why risk everything?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Because it's never enough. The jets, the houses, the lifestyle his family expects, it all costs more than he makes. And admitting that would mean admitting failure. "And you're sure about going forward, once this is in motion?" "There's no going back. I know." I met her eyes. "But he left me no choice the moment he decided to use my work to build his fraud." My phone lit up with a text. "Judith Reed, at nearly 4 a.m. My mother-in-law slept even less than I did, especially when planning one of her foundation events. Rebecca, just confirming you and Alexander for the foundation dinner next Thursday. The governor will be there." Perfect timing. I typed back immediately. "We'll be there. Actually, I've been reviewing some fascinating financial records lately, including the foundation's offshore accounts. Perhaps we could discuss them." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Finally, Alexander handles all those details. Let's focus on seating arrangements, shall we? I smiled. Confirmation that Judith knew exactly what was happening with the foundation money. One more piece of evidence for my case. Of course, I replied. Happy to help any way I can. I set the phone down and turned to Vanessa. Judith just implicated herself. Wouldn't even ask which accounts I was referring to. Vanessa shook her head. The whole family's involved then. Right down to cousin Patrick on the board of directors. I opened another file. The injunction against Alexander's personal accounts goes into effect tomorrow. He won't be able to move any significant funds without triggering alerts. He'll panic, Vanessa warned. Men like Alexander always do something stupid when cornered. As if on cue, my phone rang. William Gregory, the one board member who'd always seen through Alexander's charm. Rebecca, sorry for the late call, he said without preamble. Emergency board meeting has been scheduled for Friday instead of next week. Alexander's pushing for approval on a major transfer before the weekend. He knows something's wrong, I said, meeting Vanessa's concerned gaze. He's trying to move the money before he can't. You have everything you need, William asked. Almost. I walked to Alexander's study, phone still pressed to my ear. There's one more piece. I entered the dark room, breathing in the scent of leather and expensive cologne. Behind his desk was a portrait of his grandfather, the founder of Reed Financial. I carefully removed it from the wall, revealing a small wall safe. The combination, William asked. Our wedding date, I replied dryly, spinning the dial. The one date he can never forget because it's hanging in the front hall. The safe door swung open. Inside, passports, emergency cash, a gun I already knew was registered and loaded, and a leather portfolio. I opened it, revealing a second USB drive. Found it, I whispered. Alexander's insurance policy, a drive containing years of correspondence and transaction records. His protection against partners who might betray him. Now it would be his undoing. I'll see you Friday, I told William. Everything will be ready. As I closed the safe and rehung the portrait, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. For a moment, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back wasn't the perfect hostess Alexander had tried to shape. She was something else entirely. Someone with steel in her spine and ice in her veins. Someone who was done playing by their rules. The Metropolitan Financial Conference was Alexander's favorite stage. 300 of the industry's elite gathered in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, and Alexander Reed was the keynote speaker. From my seat in the shadows of the balcony, I watched him work the crowd, his smile bright but strained at the edges. He didn't know I was here. According to him, I was hosting a charity luncheon across town, the perfect excuse to miss his moment of glory. Instead, I'd sent my regrets to the luncheon committee and slipped into the conference just as Alexander took the stage. The market doesn't forgive hesitation, he was saying, his voice carrying that artificial confidence I'd grown to recognize. When opportunity presents itself, you must seize it immediately. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the podium. A normal observer wouldn't notice, but I knew every tell. The way he adjusted his tie too frequently, the half-second pause before answering questions, the slightly too wide smile. Alexander Reed was terrified. He should be. 3 days ago, the injunction had frozen his personal accounts. Yesterday, his request for the emergency transfer had been quietly delayed by the board pending routine compliance review. In the crowd below, I spotted Harrison Wright, Alexander's biggest investor, frowning as he whispered to his CFO. 2 rows behind him, the Matsuda Group executives exchanged glances when Alexander stumbled over projections for the Asian markets. Projections I knew were fabricated because I'd traced the real numbers through the shell companies. The strike had begun, and Alexander didn't even realize it yet. My phone vibrated with a text from Vanessa. SEC contact confirms they're ready. Green light for Friday. I slipped out before the Q&A session began. I had somewhere more important to be. The 31st floor of First Metro Bank housed my other office, the one Alexander knew nothing about. William had arranged it 3 months ago when I first brought him evidence of the fraud. Now it had become my war room. The largest wall was covered in documentation. Financial statements, photographs, emails, and transaction records, all connected with red string like something from a crime thriller. In the center, a timeline of Alexander's fraudulent empire, dating back to the acquisition strategy I'd developed 2 years ago, the same strategy he'd called cute but naive before presenting it as his own work 6 months later. Vanessa entered, carrying 2 coffees and a thick folder. "Security footage from the Mandarin Oriental," she said, handing me the folder. "Confirmed that Alexander met with Thorne and Megan 3 times last week. They're getting nervous." I added the stills to the evidence wall. "And Alexander has no idea you're helping me." "None. As far as he knows, I'm just an old college friend who works in risk assessment. He actually tried to recruit me to help hide his Singapore transfers last month." She smiled grimly. "I recorded the entire conversation, of course." I stared at the wall, this physical manifestation of betrayal and deception. For years, I'd been the perfect corporate wife, hosting the right parties, wearing the right clothes, saying the right things. I'd sublimated my own ambitions to help build Alexander's career, believing we were partners. What a fool I'd been. "You know what's almost funny?" I said, sipping my coffee. "When we met, I was the rising star, youngest risk analyst ever promoted to strategy development at Miller Hayworth. Alexander was struggling at his family firm, desperate to prove himself. I thought we'd elevate each other." Vanessa squeezed my shoulder. "You're about to elevate yourself right over him." My phone buzzed with a calendar alert. "Foundation Gala, 7:30 p.m. "Ready for tonight?" Vanessa asked. I nodded, moving to the small closet where I'd hung the gown for this evening. Black Valentino, classic but striking. Phase 1 begins in exactly 4 hours. The Metropolitan Grand Hotel ballroom glittered with old money and new ambition. The annual Reed Foundation Gala was Judith's crowning achievement, a $1 million fundraiser ostensibly for educational initiatives that actually functioned as a tax shelter and networking opportunity. I circulated through the crowd, playing my role perfectly. The supportive wife, the gracious hostess, the woman who knew exactly which donor needed which compliment. No one noticed as I gradually positioned myself near the audio-visual control booth, where the technician I'd carefully cultivated over the past 3 galas was waiting. "Mrs. Reed," he acknowledged with a nod. "Everything's set for your husband's presentation." "Thank you, Michael, and the special materials." He patted the laptop. "Queued up and ready, just as you requested, though I still don't understand why." "It's a surprise," I said, slipping an envelope into his pocket. "A well-compensated one." Alexander took the stage at 9 p.m. sharp, resplendent in his tuxedo, the Reed family confidence on full display. The crowd quieted as he began his usual speech about the foundation's accomplishments and future goals. "The Reed family has always understood that true success comes with responsibility," he intoned, glass raised. "Each generation must build upon the legacy of those who came before, creating opportunities for those who will follow." I nodded to Michael, who tapped a command into his computer. Behind Alexander, the presentation screen flickered. Instead of the foundation's logo, a spreadsheet appeared, line after line of transactions between the Reed Foundation and a series of numbered accounts in the Cayman Islands. Accounts that matched those on my evidence wall. It took the audience a moment to register what they were seeing. Alexander, facing them, remained oblivious to the changed screen behind him. "As I've always believed," he continued, "success requires recognizing opportunity and acting decisively when others hesitate." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Glasses stilled halfway to lips, eyes widened then narrowed. I stepped forward, my voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. "I couldn't agree more about seizing opportunities, Alexander." He turned, confusion clouding his face before he saw the screen. The blood drained from his cheeks so quickly I thought he might faint. "There appears to be a technical problem," he stammered, frantically signaling to the AV booth. "No problem at all," I replied smoothly. "Just a preview of the Foundation's expanded transparency initiatives. After all, your investors deserve to know exactly where their charitable donations are going, don't they?" The screen changed again, displaying emails between Alexander and James Thorne, discussing how to route foundation funds through the Singapore pipeline. Alexander's eyes found mine across the ballroom, and in that moment he knew. This wasn't a mistake or a hack. This was me. "Rebecca," he said, my name like a warning. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion privately," I suggested, my smile never wavering as I addressed the increasingly uncomfortable crowd. "The board meeting tomorrow will provide a more appropriate forum for these financial details." Chaos erupted as I walked calmly toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Judith's brittle voice trying to salvage the situation, Sophia's nervous laughter, and Alexander's increasingly desperate attempts to explain away what everyone had just seen. Outside in the cool spring air, I took my first deep breath in hours. The first strike had landed. Alexander now knew he had an enemy, but he still didn't understand the full extent of what was coming. Tomorrow would change that forever. The Reed Financial boardroom fell silent as I entered, USB drive in hand. 12 pairs of eyes followed my progress to the podium, 11 board members and Alexander, who sat rigid at the far end of the polished table. His expression cycled rapidly between disbelief, rage, and something that looked almost like fear. "Mrs. Reed," William Gregory acknowledged, nodding for me to proceed. "The floor is yours." I connected the drive to the presentation system, feeling the weight of the moment. For 7 years, I'd been invisible in this room, the CEO's wife who occasionally dropped by with lunch or appeared at the Christmas party. Today, I was finally stepping into the light. "Thank you for accommodating this unusual presentation," I began, my voice steady. "What I'm about to show you concerns the future of this company and potentially serious legal violations that put all of us at risk." Alexander shifted forward. "This is absurd. My wife has no standing to address this board on financial matters." William raised a hand. "Given the nature of the materials previewed at last night's gala, the board has agreed to hear Mrs. Reed out." The first slide appeared. A timeline of Alexander's transactions over the past 3 years, highlighting the pattern of funds moving through shell companies before returning as investment gains. "Note the recurring pattern of transfers to Cayman accounts," I said, indicating the highlighted sections. "Each transfer occurs within 48 hours of a major client investment, but never appears on quarterly statements." Alexander's face flushed. "Rebecca clearly doesn't understand the complexity of these transactions. International transfers often require temporary holding accounts for currency stabilization." I clicked to the next slide. Alexander's emails to James Thorne discussing the usual cleanup procedure for keeping the real numbers off the books. "Perhaps you'd like to explain the cleanup procedure," I asked. Judith stood, her voice tight with controlled fury. "This is hardly the time or place for domestic grievances, dear. If you're having marriage difficulties, this isn't the way to address them." I turned to face my mother-in-law directly. "These aren't domestic grievances, Judith. They're federal crimes, fraud, tax evasion, and misappropriation of client funds." I clicked to a new slide showing Judith's signature on foundation documents authorizing transfers to the same shell companies. "Crimes you're implicated in, by the way." Judith sank back into her chair, the blood draining from her face. "The Securities and Exchange Commission will receive copies of all this documentation within the hour," I continued, moving through the presentation methodically. "I've already provided preliminary information to investigators who are very interested in the pattern of client fund mismanagement." "This is nothing but a vindictive witch hunt," Alexander snarled, desperation creeping into his voice. "Rebecca is bitter about our personal issues and trying to destroy what my family has built." I pulled up the Singapore acquisition proposal. The one I'd created that had catapulted Alexander to financial stardom 2 years ago. Let's discuss bitterness, then. This proposal bears your name, but was written entirely by me. The metadata still shows my authorship, though you removed it from the version presented to clients. Board members exchanged glances. James Peterson, the senior financial officer, peered at the document with growing concern. The investment strategy that became this company's signature approach wasn't created by Alexander Reed. It was developed by Rebecca Andrews, me, before I even met Alexander. The same Rebecca Andrews who was being considered for partnership at Miller Hayworth before resigning to support her husband's career. Alexander stood, desperation making him reckless. This is preposterous. Rebecca has always been supportive of my work, but she's never had the acumen for high-level strategy. She's an analyst at best. An analyst who graduated first in her class at Wharton while you were on academic probation, I replied calmly. An analyst who created the risk assessment matrix your company still uses. An analyst who has documented every instance of you taking credit for her work over the past 7 years. Through the glass walls of the boardroom, I could see reporters gathering in the lobby, exactly as planned. You might want to prepare a statement, I told Alexander as I disconnected the USB drive. And you might want to ask Megan about the real purpose of her trips to Singapore with James Thorne. The hotel receipts make for interesting reading. As I walked toward the door, Alexander made one last desperate attempt. The board knows me. They know my family's legacy. Who are they going to believe? The CEO who's generated record profits or a bitter wife with an axe to grind? I turned back, meeting his gaze steadily. They're going to believe the evidence. The same evidence the SEC, the FBI Financial Crimes Unit, and the Wall Street Journal will see by the end of the day. The stunned silence followed me out the door. 3 days after the board meeting, Alexander held a press conference in the lobby of Reed Financial. From my position at the back of the room, I watched him declare the allegations baseless and promise a full internal review that would vindicate the Reed name completely. He looked terrible, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. The confidence that had charmed investors and the press for years now seemed hollow, brittle. My wife Rebecca and I stand united against these accusations, he declared, his eyes scanning the crowd desperately. He hadn't seen me yet, standing in the shadows. This is nothing more than a coordinated attack by competitors trying to undermine market confidence in our firm. A reporter from the Financial Times raised her hand. Mr. Reed, sources indicate the SEC has already frozen several accounts associated with your company. Can you comment on this? Alexander's smile faltered. Routine compliance measures. We're cooperating fully. Another reporter called out. Is it true that board member William Gregory has called for your resignation pending investigation? Before Alexander could respond, Judith swept in, the perfect picture of affronted dignity. The board fully supports my son. The Reed family has built this company over 3 generations, and we will not be undermined by baseless rumors and innuendo. I stepped forward then, emerging from the shadows. A ripple went through the press corps as cameras swiveled toward me. Alexander's face went slack with shock. Rebecca, he breathed into the microphone, forgetting it was live. What are you doing here? I smiled, the same perfect hostess smile I'd worn for years. Supporting my husband, of course. Isn't that what you just told everyone I'm doing? The reporters surged forward, questions overlapping. Mrs. Reed, are you behind the allegations? Is it true you provided documents to the SEC? Have you been working with the board against your husband? Before I could answer, William Gregory appeared at my side. Mrs. Reed is here at my invitation, he said firmly. As of this morning, 7 of the 9 board members have voted to suspend Alexander Reed pending investigation and appoint an interim CEO to stabilize the company. Alexander lunged for the microphone. This is an illegal coup. I founded this company. Your grandfather founded this company, William corrected, and he built it on principles of integrity that appear to have been forgotten. The corporate summit was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the main conference center, an emergency meeting of major clients, investors, and financial partners. I changed into the midnight blue Chanel suit I'd selected specially for this moment. The outfit was both funeral and rebirth, mourning the death of who I'd pretended to be and celebrating who I was about to become. When I entered the packed auditorium, the buzz of conversation died. At the front row, Judith's Botoxed face struggled to maintain composure, while Sophia stared fixedly at her phone. Alexander was conspicuously absent, sequestered with his lawyers, according to William. "Ladies and gentlemen," William began from the podium, "thank you for coming on such short notice. As chair of the board's ethics committee, it falls to me to address the serious concerns that have emerged regarding the management of Reed Financial. I'd like to introduce Rebecca Reed, who has brought these matters to light and will present the documentation." As I took the podium, I felt an odd sense of calm. The years of diminishment, of swallowing my ambition, of smiling while Alexander claimed my work, all of it had led to this moment. "What you're about to see represents 3 years of systematic fraud," I began, launching the presentation. "Documentation includes email exchanges, bank statements, security footage, and witness testimony confirming that Alexander Reed, Judith Reed, and several senior executives have been diverting client funds through offshore accounts." For the next hour, I methodically presented the evidence, watching recognition, and then outrage spread across the faces of investors who suddenly understood how they'd been deceived. I walked them through acquisition strategies that had been manipulated, profits that had been hidden, and taxes that had been evaded. On page 394 of the documentation, a page I'd deliberately placed near the end when attention might be flagging, I highlighted a crucial email from Alexander to James Thorne. "Rebecca's latest strategy for the Asian markets will generate at least 18% returns, but will report 12% and route the difference through Singapore. She has no idea how valuable her work is, which is exactly why I married her. All the brains with none of the ambition to threaten my position. As long as I keep her busy with charity committees and dinner parties, I have access to investment strategies no one else has thought of." The room erupted in chaos. Investors shouted questions, demanding to know which strategies were legitimate and which were fraudulent. Representatives from partner firms huddled with their legal teams. In the front row, Judith had gone deathly pale. I raised my hand for silence. "Before we conclude, there's one more item the SEC might find interesting." I pulled up a call log between Alexander and a blocked number, with dates and times highlighted. This log shows regular contact between Alexander Reed and Thomas Chen of the Regulatory Commission, contact that intensified before each surprise inspection of Reed financial records. William stepped forward. "Mrs. Reed has provided the board with incontrovertible evidence of widespread financial misconduct. While the legal process takes its course, we have a responsibility to our clients and shareholders to stabilize the company immediately." He turned to me. "The board would like to invite Rebecca Reed to join us as acting CEO during this transition period. Her intimate knowledge of both the legitimate strategies and the fraudulent activities makes her uniquely qualified to guide the company through this crisis." The shocked murmur that swept the room was music to my ears. "I accept," I said simply. As the meeting dissolved into urgent conversations and legal consultations, I packed my presentation materials. Judith approached, her face a mask of cold fury. "You've destroyed my family," she hissed, quiet enough that only I could hear. I met her gaze evenly. "No, Judith, your family destroyed itself. I'm just making sure they can't take everyone else down with them." As I walked out of the conference room, now the acting CEO of the company Alexander had claimed I would never understand, I felt lighter than I had in years. The perfect hostess had served her last dinner party. 6 months later, I walked into my new office, not in the stuffy, wood-paneled Reed Financial building, but in a sleek co-working space of glass and steel overlooking Central Park. The company had been renamed Prism Financial Partners after the board voted unanimously to distance it from the Reed family scandal. Alexander had pled guilty to reduced charges in exchange for testimony against larger players in the fraud network, including James Thorne and Thomas Chen. He would serve at least 5 years. Judith had avoided criminal charges through a combination of age, strategic ignorance, and expensive lawyers, but the foundation had been dissolved, its assets seized. Last I heard, she'd retreated to the family's home in Palm Beach, socially ostracized by the same circles she'd once dominated. The morning papers sat on my desk, Reed Financial stock, now Prism Financial, had surged 15% under my leadership as permanent CEO. The headline read, "Phoenix from the Ashes, How Rebecca Reed Transformed Financial Scandal into Market Success." I smiled at the irony. For years, I'd been Rebecca Reed, Alexander's wife. Now he was Rebecca Reed's disgraced ex-husband. Vanessa appeared in my doorway, holding 2 coffee cups. Ready for the Chen Group meeting? They're increasing their investment by $20 million. The same Chen Group that Alexander said would never work with a female CEO. She grinned. The very same. Their exact words were, "We're interested in working with the actual financial genius behind the strategies we've admired." As the sun set over Manhattan that evening, I hosted a small dinner on the rooftop terrace of my new apartment. Not the penthouse Alexander and I had shared, but a modern loft I'd chosen for myself. Around the table sat the people who'd helped me through the darkest months. Vanessa, William, my sister Emma, who'd flown in from Seattle, and a few trusted colleagues from Prism. William raised his glass. "To new beginnings." "And to the truth finally coming to light," Vanessa added. I thought back to a dinner 3 years ago, when Alexander had patronizingly patted my hand after I'd tried to contribute to a discussion about market volatility. "Leave the real business discussions to those who understand them, darling," he'd said, to appreciative chuckles from his colleagues. Now those same colleagues reported to me. Alexander's condescension had been transformed into my authority. The skills he'd belittled had rebuilt what his fraud had nearly destroyed. The following week, I kept a promise I'd made to myself during those long nights gathering evidence. I met with Rachel Chen, a brilliant MBA student I'd been mentoring through Columbia Business School's Women in Finance program. "I don't understand how you did it," she said as we walked through the park. "To go from being dismissed to being in charge in less than a year. Weren't you terrified?" I considered the question carefully. Yes, but not of failure. I was terrified of staying silent, of continuing to let someone else take credit for my work and my mind. Once I decided I wouldn't accept that anymore, the fear became irrelevant. Rachel nodded slowly. "I've been offered a position at Keller Stevens. The money's great, but I've heard their culture is toxic to women with ambition. Yes, it is." I stopped walking and faced her directly. "Listen to me, Rachel. Your brilliance isn't something to be harvested by men who will take credit for it. It's your power. Guard it fiercely. Like you did." Eventually, I wish I'd done it sooner. 1 year to the day after Alexander's guilty plea, I stood at the window of my corner office at Prism Financial Partners. The Manhattan skyline stretched before me, golden in the late afternoon light. On the shelves behind my desk sat the evidence of what I'd built: industry awards, financial journals featuring profiles of the company's remarkable turnaround, and a framed Wall Street Journal headline. "Prism Financial soars under new leadership, the rebirth of an institution." The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Andrews, your 4 o'clock is here." I'd reclaimed my maiden name along with my career. "Send her in, please." The door opened to reveal a young woman in her early 20s, resume clutched nervously in hand. Julia Martinez, top of her class at NYU, brilliant with algorithmic trading models, and according to her professors, chronically underestimated because of her quiet demeanor. "Ms. Andrews, thank you so much for..."